Hey listeners, I see you and I appreciate you. Thank you for taking our podcast on your journey. Thank you for sharing the episodes with folks who appreciate our discussions. I see the steady growth in listeners and I am grateful for you. Today on the PeopleNova Podcast, we bring our humanity to work with us. Many of our listeners are scaling businesses. Today's episode helps you nurture human-centered workplaces. Research indicates companies that invest in the success of employees outperform. So let's bring the research off the page and into action. With today's guest, Ashley Kirsner, we discuss techniques based in psychological research to help people interact more genuinely and feel more connected to each other in their daily lives. Welcome to the PeopleNova Podcast. My name is Rachel O'Neill, and today I am here with an amazing colleague. Hey, Ashley.
Hi. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Ashley, do a favor for us. Introduce yourself for our audience.
Sure. I'm Ashley Kirsner, and I'm the founder and CEO of Skip the Small Talk. And that's a company I started about 4 years ago. And I'm sure you'll be asking a million questions, so I won't give you my pitch.
So our podcast is about the human side of business, right? We are lovely, wonky humans with all of our ins and outs. So when I chat and I say, the human side of business, what does that mean to you?
Wow. It's honestly, my first thought when I hear that is like, it's a little revolutionary to think of it that way. Honestly, I think that for so long, there's been such a dichotomy between business and being a human. And I think that now we're in this really incredible age where we're realizing that not only can those coexist, but being human can actually improve, how much money you make, like very capitalistic terms of success. So I think when I think of the human side of business, I mean, for me with that, my first thought that comes up is really like how, in my experience, I think I actually don't really have a business background. My background's in psychology research. I sort of happened upon the business that I started and got a ton of help and learned a ton from folks like Rachel. I think the reason that Skip the Small Talk became such a big thing was because it was so human, and that I wasn't going about this trying to optimize for how much money I was making. I wasn't optimizing for how do I get the most customers. I was really just creating something that I wanted and telling people about it in the way that I would want to hear about it. Mm-hmm. And it got successful. So I think there's I don't know. I think there's a lot of people who are very skeptical about getting into business is very you have to be really robotic. You have to always be thinking about the bottom line. But I think there's this sort of revolution now that's happening where people are realizing that if you focus more on the human side of it, you actually can make more dollars, even in very concrete terms. So those are my thoughts on the human
so much to unpack. I love this. You give away my tagline, hey, everyone, if we're just more human, you will succeed. Great.
Right. I think there's also this false belief that in order to be human centered, that you have to tell everyone all your deepest, darkest traumas. And you have to you have to tell everyone every moment you're feeling sad. You have to tell everyone every moment you're not feeling totally perfect.
Right.
And I don't think that's quite it either. I think there is a middle ground where you can feel really good about sharing the stuff that you think is relevant and sharing the stuff that will make you feel more connected, sharing the stuff that will make people care and that will make you feel more seen. And that doesn't need to include what you had for breakfast every day. It doesn't need to, I think there's a lot of ways to feel a lot more seen, feel a lot more vulnerable, feel a lot more connected. That doesn't entail doing the stuff that I think it gets a bad rap because it's if you're a boss, you shouldn't be, venting all your problems to everyone. And I'm yes, that's true. You should be venting your problems to people above you in the power structure or at the same level, but not below.
Ooh, great. Okay. So another colleague described it as circles, mm-hmm. as concentric circles. Mm-hmm. Was that you? Did I steal that from someone?
No, I stole it from somebody else. No,
okay, great. Cool.
Ring
awesome.
theory, I believe it's
Ring
called.
Theory.
Yeah.
Winner. Yes, that's it. Right. And so,
yes.
So that's the dynamic of whether it's power structure hierarchy or peer, coping, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's someone or a critical incident at the center of something, try and go to a bigger circle, a bigger ring, to vent, find support, release the pressure valve, right? As opposed to like folding in on that circle or that event or that, critical moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the example I often think of is like if if my grandma passed away, I wouldn't look to my grandpa for support because he's probably struggling even more than I am.
Great.
He's closer to the center of the trauma. So I want to look outward. So people who are farther away from it. So like maybe somebody who's just not in my family who isn't struggling with it. Or I look out to, just people who are not as affected by it because they're going to be able to support me a lot better because they're less affected by it. And it puts a lot of less pressure on them because, they're not struggling in that particular way. So I think it's just a more efficient way to get your needs met.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you. And I think it's phenomenal that you mentioned it, right? Because even as developing your own leadership skills and a lot of our audience are, running their own business and their own company and like trying to figure that out, like the adage is like, it's lonely at the top. And it's like, yeah, if you think of it that way, like find a ring, like find a circle.
Exactly. Right. It's lonely if you're only looking within the circle of your business. If you are at the top, like you're correct. You should not be looking to like people who work under you to support you for your problems because that power imbalance makes it really uncomfortable. Like they have to be there for you. They're not given as much of an option to opt out if they're not feeling up for it, if they don't think they can support you in the way that you need. But if you can look to somebody who's, completely out of that realm and you can get social support in like, if you are a part of a religious organization and looking to people there or like,
a CEO
a mentor.
roundtable.
Right. Like those are the places to be looking. But I think it's hard because if you are, in charge of things and you're feeling really isolated and you see these like very willing people who are probably very compassionate, probably do want to be there for you in some ways and are willing to, then like, it's so easy to want to like, sort of feelings vomit onto people who are, there for you in a lot of ways, but, it's not really as appropriate for them to be there for you if you are their boss.
It's okay to be or demonstrate emotions at work and like be a feelings individual, but there's like a boundary of this isn't bring your bag of drama to work day, right? And like if you are not feeling centered and grounded and there is just too much that you can't protect that like inner cup of reserves, right? And so you need to share overly with everyone, like maybe we do need a wellness day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a useful, it's almost like a useful sign, like when somebody is sort of like, sharing inappropriately with people, it means that they don't have other spaces to do it where they feel comfortable.
Oh, great reframe.
Yeah. Like, I mean, honestly, that's when I've had like facilitators who work for me through Skip the Small Talk. And like, I've had some folks, that's actually a big part of the interview process is like just getting a sense of their vibe. Like, do you feel like you're generally well taken care of? And if I feel like on average people are like, as long as they're qualified, I'll bring them on. But then like, if I notice that within that, then stuff starts coming out, like that's a great sign that like they're really struggling and like, it's a time to like boost other supports, like do like, how can I, and then, it becomes a question of how can I support you? And like, do you need, like, I have resources for great therapists. Like I try and really normalize that. Like I see a therapist. I don't work with people who don't see therapists.
100%. I talk about my therapist and my mental wellness journey. And like, I'll bring it up with other people and be like, are you seeing someone? Like not to be like disparaging, but to be like, no, I'm genuinely like interested in your well-being. Right. I want you to be working with a qualified professional. Like,
right. And like, some people are not ready for it. Some people don't want it. Some people still have a lot of stigma about it. That's fine. But as long as you're like finding some place to get, to feel heard, That's what feels important to me. Because that is what my whole company is about. Like if I'm not doing that, like in my like relationships with people who are working with me, like what am I even doing?
Oh my God, I love it. This is called Walk, Talk, Match. Awesome.
Oh, I love that.
This is great. You totally just teed this up for me, right? So
what's walk, talk, match?
Walk, talk, match, right? So people are like, oh, I wanna work with people who have integrity. And it's like, all right, well, what does integrity mean to you? Right? And when I'm coaching clients to develop their organization culture and their organization values, I move away from like the one word, like communication, integrity, respect, like a lot of that is kind of, frankly, subject to interpretation. What kind of communication? Do you mean like urgent matter communication or like everyday emails? Because I suck at emails, right?
Right.
What we're talking about here. So when it comes to integrity, it's what am I saying? And does it match with what am I doing? Walk, talk, match, or talk, walk, match, if you want to be literal.
Love that. That's
right.
Yeah. I mean, it's like an adaptation of, I'm trying to remember, I feel like it was a Buddhist thing. Now I'm totally forgetting it. But yeah, it's like true happiness is like when your actions are aligned with your values. And like, yeah. And like you can succeed without doing that. But then I think it just feels so, I don't know. I've never been able to savor a success if like my actions have not been aligned with my values.
I think we, general society, we feel that dichotomy. And it's like, how do we reconcile that dichotomy? How do we reconcile like how I want to show up in the world versus how I'm feeling I show up in the world, right?
I think one of the simplest things that I like coach people on is you can share how you're feeling, but like contain it so that it's not the other person's job to take care of you.
Okay. Thank you for getting there. Oh my God, this is amazing, right? Because oftentimes it's like, how are you? I'm, blah, here's my bag of drama, right? And it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? Am I supposed to do something with that?
Like, right.
Rachel just shared this with me.
Yeah. And I feel like I want to help her, but like, I don't know her well enough to even know it's going to be useful. Like,
Right.
Yeah. So it puts everyone in an uncomfortable situation. And then you feel bad because you're like, oh, I've overshared. Like, they aren't supporting me in the way that I need. Like, I probably freaked them out. And they're just wondering, I don't know how to support you properly. Like, I feel so bad. So honestly, I kind of believe that when we talk about oversharing, that this is what we're talking about. It's not the raw information that you share. It's the expectation that you put on the other person to be there for you. Because the example I give is like, you can watch a movie, and I don't think anyone's ever been to a movie and been like, oh, I felt like they overshared. Like, you're fine, like taking in content of how people are feeling, what people think, people's opinions. Like that in itself is often like pretty fine, unless you have specific triggers. That's a different situation. That's valid too. But I think that like if you like taking in raw information, generally fine. But aside from that, like, I think when people have the expectation on you, like when you're putting people in a situation where there's sort of an expectation that they're supposed to be there for you. They're supposed to maybe say something nice, maybe
or solve it.
Exactly. Like that's when people feel like oversharing has happened. So I think as long as boundaries exist, like oversharing isn't really a phenomenon that you see. And I see that at my events. Like we're like having people talk to each other about really vulnerable stuff. And we ask people if they feel like their partner overshared. And because it's such a boundaried event, because people are only with people for a certain period of time, they're given specific instructions about how to respond and when to respond. People don't feel like they overshare.
I think it's interesting because we coach leaders to be support and emotionally intelligent. And I think there's also a healthy tablespoon of you're the boss, you have the answers. And not everyone has all of the answers.
Right.
Even the dude behind the curtain, Oz doesn't have it.
Yeah. First thing comes to mind is every time like my expectation isn't that leaders have all the answers. I've learned that over time, like from many disappointments. It's that leaders will join you in finding the answer if they don't know.
Great.
Like, because I think you don't need to know everything, but you do need to manage everything.
There was just a recent article that went through, the startup world about a CEO who's like, man, I have been burnt out and grinding and it's terrible. And I just, didn't rage quit, but like I quit and like, here's my narrative. And he posted this huge article on Medium about like how he was struggling and how he couldn't share that.
Yeah, I think it honestly turns into like a behavioral economics game where if nobody is sharing, it doesn't really make sense for any individual to share, because if one person shares, it's an opportunity for everybody else to jump on them and be like, oh, like, I don't, oh, that wasn't really the norm. Like, you clearly can't read a room. Like, that's not what we do here. But if you are in charge and you have the opportunity to create a culture where that is what everyone is doing, that's just the optimal solution in that situation. Like, I think if you can really get everybody to get on board with sharing a little more, being a little more open about what what realistic expectations of you are, I think everybody succeeds. And also, like, I think a lot of people make the argument too, where they're like, oh no, but that's what puts pressure on people to work harder, is like, if you can't share that stuff and you can't share how you're feeling, then you just shove it down and you work twice as hard because you don't want anyone to notice that you're struggling.
Not a good look.
Yeah, not a good look.
Not a good look.
And B, like, people burn out so fast. Like, it's, sure, that'll work for a short time, but there are other companies out there. There are the Googles in the world who are saying, take your time, you're fine. Like, feel free to have that like 3-month like trip to Mount Everest. Like,
hey, you need a sabbatical? Great. How do we support you?
Right. And those are the people who are going to get your employees.
Yeah. Talk about organization culture and like how to weave in your decisions and values alignment. Oh, Walk Talk Match. Here we go again.
Yeah, exactly.
The human side of business, right? Because businesses are made up of humans.
It's not an accident that like companies that there's research suggesting that companies that really invest in their employees' well-being are more successful and make more money and keep their employees longer. It's just a smart thing to do.
It really is, but also incredibly hard.
It's hard. If it were easy, people would be doing it because that does make more money.
Okay, so let's circle back. A while ago, you said that you ask some really in-depth questions of folks that you want to kind of bring on board and help run your business. Let's give a couple quick interviewing tips and tricks for folks who might be listening, because I think asking great questions and really understanding the candidates is crucial. I've been in interviewing my entire career, right? And we all know the joke of like, oh, it's recruiting day. Everybody's on their best behavior, right? The company's on their best behavior, the candidates on their best behavior, right? There's this like, let's not share our bag of drama. Like, how do we get past that and really understand what's motivating either the candidate or like what's exciting about the organization's mission?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind in terms of interviewing and what I found really helpful. One thing is asking very specific questions about like, here's an example scenario. There's no right answer to dealing with it, but how would you deal with it? I think especially when I'm bringing on new facilitators for events, I want to know what's going to happen when, somebody like breaks a glass over here. Somebody over here is like yelling at them because the pizza's not there on time. Or
you have 90 humans in a space.
Right. Like I just want to know what their prioritization process is, what their thought process is. Like, are they thinking about are they just sort of taking, I think one thing I actually specifically look for in that is, do you tend to prioritize whatever thing is the loudest or the most annoying, or are you prioritizing whatever is most important? So like in the context of facilitating an event, what comes to mind is like, if glass broke over there, but nobody's yelling at me about it, but somebody's yelling at me that the pizza is going to come 5 minutes late, like I can't do much about the pizza, but that glass is going to hurt someone. And even if nobody's telling me about it, I need to prioritize that. And that's sort of a small example of this, but I think that comes up in so many other contexts where like you have a million things on your plate. Maybe you're not going to finish them all on the timeline that you hoped. Are you going to just do whatever you think is going to, are you going to do things based on social pressure? Or are you going to do things based on what you think is going to be best for the company? So I think that's an important thing that I look for. And the other thing is what people say in between the questions that I'm asking, actually. So oftentimes, like when people tell me why they like skip the small talk, that's something I listen a lot to. If people tell me they like it because of our accomplishments, I'm actually less inclined to be compelled by that, as if I were to hear someone about like what, like our impact that we have on people.
Yeah.
That's way more compelling to me. So I want to know that people are motivated by the right things. And that they're not just doing this because, it's a job that they know they're going to be able to have for a long time. And that, they know that, obviously that's going to be something that is compelling. I already know that. But if people can share with me, like what touches them about it, like, that's what I want to hear. And the last thing I look for is, again, what people are sort of saying in between the questions, like, are people sort of, because my company is all about vulnerability, a lot of people mistake that for, oh, good, I get to just tell you all my problems. And like, this gets to be a free therapy session for me. So like, I think it's very easy for people, like if you are with an active listener, a lot of people let down their guard completely and will just sort of tell you kind of inappropriate stuff. And so just gauging that, like, honestly, that's been the biggest thing that I've used to weed out a lot of people, is when people in an interview will sort of say things that are, complain about their own personal problems and put me in a position where I'm playing therapist, even though they're the ones interviewing for the position, which happens surprisingly often.
Wow. That.
And maybe this is a problem unique to like, organizations that have like this vulnerable culture and this like, culture of open communication. But if you are in a company that is lucky enough to have that culture, I think that is definitely something to look out for.
That is a very interesting like interview, like lookout, like be on the lookout for that.
Yeah.
How do I, as a candidate, how do I be likable so that I can get that job, right? Like, I think there's a little bit of social pressure that comes in an interview setting to like prove and like find that common ground.
Right. So much of it is likability. And I think that's why it's so important when people, I think I often will sort of lean into questions during an interview about like, whatever they're struggling with, or like, if they meant, often they'll sort of like mention things where I can sort of put pieces together, like, oh, you're in graduate school, that sounds hard. Or like, oh, like you're trying to do this in the middle of a pandemic, that sounds hard. Or like, there's always something that I can grab onto that's like, oh, you're going through this difficult thing. And I ask some questions about that sometimes because I want to know, like, are you able to communicate your feelings about it while keeping it contained?
Great.
That is so important to me. If you can tell me how something is hard and how you're managing it, I want to hire you.
Great. I think that is an amazing life skill, right?
Yeah.
Like whether you're going and interviewing for a job, whether you are completing grad school, whether you are relocating in a pandemic, whether you are breaking up with a loved one, right? In a romantic relationship, like, life is challenging for everyone, right? Like I'm not doing any asterisks or special favor. Like life is hard for everyone, right? But it's how you manage those difficult things, like ring theory. Like, are you going in to the inside of the trauma to seek your support, or are you realizing that you need to go to a wider ring for coping and boundary setting and parameters of like, I can hang out and we can be social, but I can't fix your problem.
Right. What's important to me is that people have a place outside of work where they can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to support them in finding it, but it needs to be outside of work.
Absolutely, right? Like work is not our identity.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so true. And it's hard. That's so hard to pull off, to like separate yourself from your work, because there's research on it that if you invest a lot of time and effort into something, that's way likelier to get fused with your identity to some degree. So if you're putting a lot of time and effort into your work, if you care about it, like that probably is going to be some percentage of your identity. And I think just I've found it helpful to just be aware of the places where I do see myself thinking, like, even in the positive ones. I think that's what's really tricky is like when skip the small talk is like when we were in Forbes, I remember I like didn't feel particularly excited about it. I was just like, oh, that's like convenient for us. And I was like, good. I worked so
Healthy.
hard. Yeah, it worked so hard. It took so long of just like, I don't know, just tons of therapy of being okay with like, I really like myself who I am regardless. Like if Skip a Small Talk crumbled tomorrow, I would still be fine. I'd be disappointed because I put a lot of work into it, but I would be fine.
And it's okay to feel that disappointment. Let's feel the feeling.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Right. It's having self-compassion for every version of yourself in between.
Yeah.
And if you can't have that, like growing just becomes so much more difficult.
Yes. The trick that I use with myself is I reframe and I call myself a learning being, not a human being. I'm a learning being.
Yeah, that's the point. That's just where you should be. Yeah.
Like I'm learning and like so if a venture fails or if a job fails, fail fast, if this, attempt didn't work out, and I didn't get all the accolades and success and external validation, I'm learning. Of course. Oh, that was different. I learned.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to learn. That's what a learning being does.
That's beautiful. Because if you can frame it as positive that you learned, like the thing to optimize for is how can I learn better? How can I learn more? Like you're going to have, like your happiness and well-being is going to be so much more in your own hands because you can control whether or not you're learning. You can't control whether or not you succeed in general by like society standards or by like external standards. So yeah, if you can like put your happiness into, if you can make your goals things that you are in control of, I think that has been such a big learning for me in terms of what makes me happy and what makes humans happy.
Yeah. That's awesome. Let's talk about goals. Let's talk about Skip the Small Talk's goals. What is up for you for Skip the Small Talk, not you?
So usually, as you know, Rachel, we host events that are designed based in psychology research to help people feel more connected. So we use question prompt card. Well, usually when it's not COVID, question prompt cards that have questions on them, like what was your high school experience like, or describe yourself through the eyes of someone who cares about you. So questions that are intended to like get you talking about your internal states and stuff that's intended to get you being a little more vulnerable, but in a safe context. And so we use those question prompt cards at our events to like get strangers to talk to each other, basically. And we've been hosting them. We've been doing about like 1 a week in Boston, I think 2 a month in New York. And we were selling out at like 90 tickets. It was like really big, like capacity events.
Great.
We were also doing a lot of private and corporate events. So like team building things. So it obviously not for strangers, obviously for people who like know each other already, trying to get each other to get a little closer. And we would do team building events. I even did like a wedding, basically anything where you have a group of people and you want them to get to know each other more deeply or get to connect more deeply or get to like each other. That was my thing.
Wow.
So that's what I was doing for a while. And now we are doing that, but online, which is so different, but surprisingly similar in a lot of ways. And in some ways, actually, I'm not going to admit this many places, but I will admit it here on this podcast. In some ways, the online events are better.
Wow. Okay. Tell us more.
Yeah, I was really surprised because I think the big draw to Skip the Small Talk is, oh my God, finally in-person experiences. Like I'm so, this is what I want. But honestly, the online events, like something about being in a private breakout room with someone, nobody can hear you but whoever's in your house, like it just feels so intimate to be talking to a stranger in your kitchen or your living room. And that's what people have told me, that it's like people actually feel a little more comfortable opening up when they're sitting on their couch and they know that like only this person can hear them. I think it's also really nice because it's less stimulating. Like for a lot of folks who are more sensitive to stimulation, if you have more social anxiety, if you are on the autism spectrum, if you like have like PTSD, basically anything where having like external stimuli is distracting, like this is so much more accessible of an event.
You get to control the set and setting as a participant and opting into this event. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Set and setting is so crucial.
Yes, I think about it so much. And that I try to avoid events in fluorescent lighting. If I'm doing it at an office, I ask them if they have any floor lamps or anything. So silly, makes such a big difference.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's research about it that like dimmer lights actually make people feel more comfortable opening up.
Huh.
Yeah.
All these fluorescent office energy efficient, like you're doing us harm. Come on, we're humans.
Yeah.
We need real light.
Exactly. Yeah, nobody likes and there's a reason. I think we're sort of intuitively realize that like we have to feel a little more like closed off with it. And it's just a little more grating. So yeah, I think all those little things really make a difference. And yeah, we've been doing more private events. I did like a few online orientations, like for the Harvard Graduate School of Education. That was very fun. Yeah.
So their incoming cohort, you did this skip the small talk event for their incoming cohort to get to know each other.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
It was so fun. They were so lovely. And like, we got really absurd feedback from that. We got like, we did a survey. I think about 60 people responded. 100% said that they would recommend it to somebody else who's incoming freshman or an incoming first year. 100% said that it was like 97% said they would come to another one, which didn't even occur to me to do another one. Honestly.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, let me do another one. Hold on.
Yeah, sure. Right. Event series. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I am doing another one for them coming up. So yeah, I think the online stuff, like, also, it just comes at a time where people are really starved for it. Like we don't like, when's the last time you talked to a stranger? Like, you know, I think conversations with strangers now that we're in the middle of a pandemic are just so different because they're covered with anxiety. They're like, am I too close to you? Am I too far from you? Are you going to make any assumptions about what I'm assuming about your health? Like, but I also want to have a mask. I don't know. It just
strangers in public.
Strangers in public, yeah.
Okay.
When you just are interacting with a stranger in your everyday life, you know, the checkout person, like, person across from you, like buying like bananas, like
still a little bit more transactional. Yeah.
There's a lot more pressure to sort of keep it a little more distance.
Yeah.
I think makes sense. Like, I think that's a good intuition. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic, doesn't make a lot of sense to linger a whole lot.
Outdoor spaces are great.
Outdoor spaces are great. May not have as much access to those in the upcoming months.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a place where people can be super comfortable talking to strangers. And I think we just like, I miss that. Like whenever I see a stranger out in the real world, you know, I'm like shouting at them from a distance, like trying to engage with them as the like ultra extrovert that I am, trying to get eke out every drop of human interaction that I can.
I love this. I'm totally not an extrovert. I'm so happy with quarantine. Can I tell you?
I bet all my introvert friends are like, this is what I've been waiting for.
How can our listeners help? What is something that our listeners can help you with? Someone listening to this and is like, oh my God, I can totally connect Ashley to blah, or like, hey, let's skip the small talk into blah, blah, blah. What are some goals?
Thank you so much. Yes, some goals are definitely doing more corporate events, doing more college events. I think that's a place where more vulnerability and open communication really needed. So those are some things. I think some other things are if I'm actually looking more to do children's events, like for kids. So children for these purposes under 18, but also around 18. So basically Gen Zers.
Okay.
Like a lot of high schoolers. I've done a few events. I did so for context, over the summer, I did this program for the state of Rhode Island for high schoolers. And it was amazing. Like they learned so much. And I just feel like high schoolers are just like little sponges. And they're old enough to understand this. And I'm just looking for ways to reach high schoolers. That's the place that's really exciting to me. So any access to high schoolers or like high schools in general, also anything educational. I think this is such a great program for socio-emotional skill teaching.
Thank you for saying the keyword.
Yay! I feel like I'm on Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Game show, all the points.
Thank you. I think that's just such honestly, like so many times socio-emotional skills are like jammed down your throat in such unpleasant ways, like when you're a kid and you're like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to meditate. Yeah, I know I'm supposed to do yoga. Thank you so much. Like I don't need the like 25th like facilitator to let me know I need to do that.
Yeah.
So I think this is like a much more gentle way to teach the skills in a way that like gives them really concrete ways to practice it in their everyday lives. Like we give them homework to practice this like actually in person, and then we check in on it. It's very fun. So basically I have this program for high schoolers. So looking to get into high schools, also looking to basically, I'm in a really open place right now. We're sort of looking at other ways that we could reach high schoolers and even younger folks potentially, looking into potentially, this is very, very maybe, this is you're the first person publicly I'm telling this to.
And all our listeners.
And all your listeners.
Tell us.
I'm actually considering the possibility of producing a YouTube series.
Nice.
That's going to be sort of like thinking of it as Mr. Rogers, but for modern age.
I love it. It's funny because I used to hold my like, oh, I'm embarrassed. I don't know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. If I don't say anything, then nobody knows I'm clueless.
Right.
And I really had to work to shift my own mindset to be like, yeah, man, I'm learning. And it's cool that I don't know this. Hey, anyone, Bueller? Yeah, cool. You're it. Come on.
Yeah, right. I honestly, like such a big part of being a leader isn't doing everything perfectly. It's knowing where you need help.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned the hard way. You can't do it all yourself.
You can't do it all yourself, right? And the leaders who are like putting out on their social media and their blogs and are like, I'm doing everything. It's like, that's not someone I want to follow. You must not. Do you sleep? Like that's my first question is like, do you like, what's your self-care plan?
It's a great way to burn out. It's a great way to burn out fast.
Great way to burn out, right? And protecting, I use the cup, the inner resource of like, just protecting your energy and protecting like, this is how I'm gonna say no. Right. And not feel bad about saying no. Be like, I'm just not the person that can help you, or like, I can't solve your bag of drama. Like, I want to see you thrive as a human, as a learning being, but like,
and saying no, it still feels bad to me sometimes. Like I think I had to learn, like, just because it feels bad in the moment doesn't mean it's bad for me. And I think like having some more nuance around it, that like I can say no and feel a little off as I notice that person's face droop a little bit. But like when I go home, it feels like a relief that I said no and that I was honest about what I was capable of.
Good. You listen to your inner self. Way to go. I support you.
Thanks. I mean, it's despite, lots of voices in my head being like, no, don't do it. Like, people aren't going to like you if you say no. You're not going to be successful if you say no. But, just because those voices exist does not mean that they are correct. I think the take-home lesson I had.
Totally. You can acknowledge those voices, be like, thank you, next. As my girl Ariana says, thank you, next.
Exactly. I will swipe left on that. Thank you so much.
And we're good.
Yeah.
One of my favorite questions to ask all my my podcast guests is, what's your favorite art?
What is my favorite art? Oh my goodness. What a delightful question.
I know, right? Because I think it touches on a lot of the themes that we've chatted about today. There's a great quote from Darren Walker. He's the CEO of the Ford Foundation, and he says, without art, there is no empathy. And without empathy, there is no justice.
Ugh, that's gorgeous. I think, yeah, I think that's really apropos. I don't think you can fight for people's rights or fight for people if you're not able to empathize with them. And so I think such a way to get to justice is through empathy. That's beautiful.
Empathy. And art stirs up so many emotions.
It does. It does. Oh man. Okay. So this is actually a very on the nose answer, I would say. So I would say I just watched, like a few weeks ago, I watched a movie, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is a Mr. Rogers documentary.
Great.
And I just think everything Mr. Rogers does is one of the most beautiful pieces of art ever. Like I've been watching some episodes of Mr. Rogers, and you know, he writes like this lyrics that are just so surprisingly poignant but understandable for a kid. And it's just I dare, for those listening, I dare you to watch the movie Won't You Be My Neighbor and not sob aggressively.
Okay.
It's I would say that's my favorite piece of art, because I think it does encourage so much empathy. And honestly, the biggest thing is it relays a message that you like, it makes people feel loved. And I think that is, Mr. Rogers believed that like that was the most important thing you could do for a child. And that's what I think is the most important thing you could do for anyone, is to make them believe that they are capable of being loved and capable of loving. And if art can do that, oh my God, like, I think that's gotta be it for me.
That is amazing. I'm going to put that link in the show notes so that everyone can watch it. I haven't watched it, so it's going in my
Rachel.
queue.
Yes, good.
One of my favorite similar documentaries is called The Mask You Live In.
Gonna have to put that on my list.
Yeah, it's the work of Ashanti Branch. He's an educator in Oakland, and he works with young men, and he helps to kind of tease out like, what is the mask that you like present to other people, like externally, but like what's behind the mask? Like, what are you feeling like inside, right? And it talks about all the masculine stereotypes that we teach society. Like, I'm not going to be gender specific, but like we teach folks that, you know, this is how masculine needs to show up, and it's in my opinion counterproductive.
There's so much pressure.
That feeling of love, right? And that feeling of like genuine acceptance for all the emotions that I'm feeling as a wonky human, as a developing adolescent, you know, male or female or non-binary, like just to feel loved and accepted.
Ugh. I'm so glad that media like that exists now. Like, that would have been unfathomable in like, you know, 50 years ago or 100, you know, like easily. At the beginning of television, like, you know, it was just like, you know, I don't know. It was a lot of very anti-human content, like laughing at other people's like misfortunes. It was a lot of like, you know, and news, which is basically that. And
litany of misfortunes.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think that compassionate media is like having a moment right now, and I like could not be happier.
Yes, that is why I started my podcast, to spread love and humanity. And even though we're at work, we can still care and be compassionate. Oh, not to derail, but like when I work with clients and they're like, how do you want me to answer? The way I am at work or the way I am at home? And I'm like, ooh,
no. Yeah.
Let's bring that together.
Wow. I think that question encapsulates so much of the problem with leaving your humanity at home and why that is even a question. And it's not their fault as individuals. It's just culturally, culture has pressured people to make those two things very different.
Exactly. Yeah. The fact that we have to ask that question, and it's like, it has struck me. It's a frequent question. It's not just a random question, right? Like, frequent question is, how do you want me to answer this? The way I am here or the way I am there? And it's like, ooh, yeah, let's reconcile that walk talk match. Oh, here we go, bring it all around. That walk
full circle.
Right? Like, let's have you show up as your genuine self, as your learning being that you were meant to be. And love and care
Yeah.
for those around us.
Yeah.
Ashley, thank you again. Absolutely loved catching up with you. And I am looking forward to seeing you in person when it is safe to do so.
Me too, so much. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on the PeopleNova Podcast. My name is Rachel O'Neill. The team here at PeopleNova Human Capital would love to hear from you. We are always curious to hear from our listeners. So go ahead and send us an email, podcast@peoplenovahc.com, with your workplace questions or suggestions for who you'd like to see on our show. If you send us an audio memo, we may include your question on the show. Lastly, we are here to amplify. Our guests are amazing entrepreneurs, and we want you to forward our newsletter to someone in your network who needs to know the amazing things our guests are doing, so together we can make an impact. Thank you so much. Take care, and we will see you next time.